and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm your host, Bill Froehlich from WTCM News. This is our weekly roundup of stories that are making headlines across northern Michigan. And at the table, we've got the journalists covering those stories across northern Michigan. This week, we're joined by Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10 News. Welcome back, Sara.
Thank you, Bill. For
the first time, we've got John Flesher from Associated Press. John, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And Peter Payette, again from IPR. Peter, welcome back.
Hi, Bill.
Thank you guys all for coming in. John, I want to start with you, the newest member to the round table, and it's good to have you with us. Let's kind of start at the bare bones basics, because I think the three of us know of you, and know of your work. But for the average person who's watching at home, tell us what an AP writer is, what an AP writer does on a daily basis.
Sure. Well, the Associated Press is the oldest and largest news gathering organization in the world. We go back to the mid-1840s when we were established as a non-for-profit co-op owned by a small group of newspapers in New York City, and it just branched out from there. And today we've got more than 300 bureaus all around the world covering the most important news and bringing that news to papers, to television, radio stations, and of course to websites. And I am an AP correspondent. I'm based here in Traverse City, and I wear a number of hats. I'm in charge of sort of being the eyes and ears of the AP for northern Michigan, anything that you would consider northern Michigan, including all of the UP. I also am the Great Lakes environmental reporter, so I keep a close eye on issues involving the entire Great Lakes region, fisheries and exotic species, all that type thing. And I also pitch in with various types of general news of statewide or national interest, sort of depending on what it is.
It was kind of an epiphany to me when I started here in this market 10 years ago to realize that when I see John Flesher's name in the paper next to an AP story, that you're a local person. Or we see John's work all the time, whether it's the TV wires or the radio, the wires that we're looking at. Or the paper as well. How much travel do you do? How much of it can you do from the comfort of your own Traverse City office?
Mostly the latter. Of course, now with the web and all kinds of things that you can do in a single location, I spend most of my time here, but I do some traveling. I've traveled as far as New Orleans to help out with the Gulf oil spill a couple of years ago. I was involved in that story. I've been out into the Dakotas to do some flood coverage, so sometimes I'll travel for national stories, but usually I'll stay in this area. I've wandered very extensively across the UP and over the years, and been down to Detroit. I was just there recently to help with our primary election coverage, so it's a mixed bag.
What do you like about that work at the AP? What really kind of gets you going, and what do you take away from the good things about it?
Well, I must confess that however young I may look, I've actually been with the AP for 31 years now, and I worked 1 year with a small paper in North Carolina, where I'm from, and have been with the AP since then. And I really love being part of an organization that literally covers the world, and being able to involve myself in news that may be of local interest and other news that can be national. And my challenge day in and day out is to find what in my coverage area would be of interest to the widest possible audience. You'd be surprised sometimes at things that would happen here that are part of trends that are taking place nationally. And this can be a good place to anchor a story like that. And so that's the way I approach my coverage. And I just really find it fascinating. You have to be a journalistic sort of jack of all trades with you're at the AP, because you can be doing anything on any given day. Sometimes it's breaking news, sometimes it's what we call enterprise or sort of feature or investigative reporting. It can be all of that, and so you have to be quite versatile. And in any given day, you really don't know what's going to happen, so that's part of the challenge, and it's a lot of fun.
You talk about the stories that have the widest impact. I know one of your most recent stories has a pretty important impact on all of northern Michigan. That's the apple crop, and I think all four of us have covered that or some ag-related issue this season because of weather conditions. So we'll go around the table, but John, give me your brief take on what you're seeing out there in the orchards this season.
Sure, yeah, I do have a story that's just out on the AP Wire today, moving nationally, about the apple situation. think as we're all aware, up in northwest lower Michigan, the crops took real pounding this year because of the really odd sequence of events that took place in March and April. We had a week or so back in March where it felt like summer, and the trees began to bud, and then we had in mid to late April several nights where the temperatures dropped well down into the 20s, the buds froze, and so it damaged cherries, peaches, and now we're seeing that the apple crop is very badly damaged. The reports we're getting that suggest that perhaps statewide 90% or so of the crop was ruined. Although there are some areas that have survived relatively well. A lot seems to depend on the whims of geography and
Right.
and the weather. But the harvest has begun several weeks early, and where the apples have survived. And up in our area, there are some places where they're already picking. And I was out at a couple of orchards up near Sutton's Bay just this week, and seeing the migrant workers there busily harvesting some apples. So it's a mixed bag. Yeah.
What's the crop nationally?
Nationally, they think that the crop is going to be about 14% below normal, certainly below what it was last year. Now, what's interesting is Washington State, which of course is the leading apple producer nationwide, had a slight improvement this year, and some of the other western states as well. So it's likely that there will be, things will kind of offset each other nationally, but of course if you want to have your locally grown apples, there will probably be some shortages in some places.
Sarah, you did the same story this week. What did you encounter?
A couple growers on Old Mission told me that they're looking at about 30% of what they had last year. And
Big
it just,
hit.
yeah, it depends on the variety, is really what we gathered. You know, some trees are okay, other ones, and they're also much smaller in size. So the one grower usually allows you pick in, you know, the fall, and he says, I just don't think I'm going to be able to do that because I don't have enough. He said he has a deal with an area school, and he sends the majority of his apples to a school system, and he says, you know, that is year after year that I have that, and if I allow you pick, I'm just not going to have enough. So, you know, he says, you know, the lack of rain hasn't really helped either. You know, he says I've been irrigating more than usual, and so we'll just have to wait and see. But as of right now, at least on Old Mission in this area, it's not looking so good.
Peter, what about you in maybe not just apples, but corn, cherries? I mean, what stands out to you from this season? Similar story for a lot of crops.
Yeah, I don't know. We've done a lot of coverage of the cherry crop, and that is, I guess, more or less wrapped up. I'm not sure I have much to add, quite frankly.
Same story, a lot of places.
But it was sad that the corn crop, we had done a report back in June that the sweet corn was looking to be the best crop they'd ever had. They were really excited. It was the one with all the fruit being annihilated. There was this one little story, even though there's only about 400 acres of sweet corn in the Grand Traverse region. I think it's a really small little niche market, but and those growers had been really excited, and the drought just wiped them out, except for the ones that have irrigation.
I think, like John said, it seems to be very dependent on where exactly you are, because we've all seen stories different from the ones that we did, where someone else found, you know, the apple farmer that's doing really well, or someone else found the corn farmer that's doing really well. And I talked to a corn farmer in Buckley who said it's just devastating. It's probably one of the worst, you know, yields they've had in 3 decades. Yeah. His analogy was, it was so hot, so dry. It was, you know, hear a fellow farmer say, it was like burned toast out in the stalks. And what happens when it rains? Well, it's too late. Now I've just got wet toast. That doesn't necessarily help it. So, but again, it's interesting that just little pockets here and there may have different stories. I think that's a challenge for us too, to figure out what we put out there may be different in one community to the next.
Sure.
Can be. Yeah, I spoke with a grower in Wisconsin for part of this story I was doing, who said that he's over west of Madison, and he's another one who was doing fairly well in comparison with the typical grower in that state. But he said the drought has been something of an issue, and also there have been some hailstorms. He said he'd spoken with someone in Pennsylvania who had a wonderful crop, and then along came a hailstorm and wiped it out. So it's been a 1, 2, 3, or 4 punch this year.
I think this year you were pretty safe reporting that it was
It was hurt.
it
Yeah.
was hurt pretty much everywhere.
Yep. Well, here's my segue of the day. Farmers take a gamble on that every year. And speaking of gambling, Peter, tell us the story that you were working on this week.
Well, yesterday the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals told the parties in a lawsuit regarding a small casino that was put up in Vanderbilt that the federal court in Detroit, I guess it would have been, had no jurisdiction to shut that casino down. People may remember that the Bay Mills Indian tribe in the UP opened up a small casino in Vanderbilt with really no, they didn't go through the normal process in the state of Michigan. The tribes go through, it just sort of sprung up.
It opened up one day and there it was.
And there it was.
Peeled off the paper and the signs were there and everything was good to go.
That's
slot
right.
machines inside.
And there were slot machines. And of course, the interesting part about this is Bay Mills is basically putting forward a legal theory that if they build casinos out of this certain pool of money that they have, don't ask me to explain the origins of it or why it pertains, but that money, if they use that money to build casinos, they can pretty much build a casino wherever they want. And so this week, the state of Michigan and the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa sued and were successful in getting the federal judge to shut the casino down before, and then go ahead and hear the case. And the judge felt that the Bay Mills tribe had very little chance of winning the case. But the Sixth Circuit, in a kind of technical ruling that I'm not sure I really understand, said the court had no jurisdiction to do that. Which I'm not sure if that means the court doesn't have jurisdiction to hear the case, but these tribal legal matters are pretty arcane. Mm-hmm. In Vanderbilt, the tribe, we've never been able to speak with the tribe. They did actually send out an email yesterday stating a couple things, but our understanding is they're not going to be reopening the casino at this time because the court case will probably last for another 10 years. But I think everyone they're pretty upfront. My understanding is Bay Mills has its sights set on Port Huron for a casino, and that this Vanderbilt casino is sort of seen as a test case to sort of test the legal waters of all this.
And it makes me wonder what the implications are, not only for maybe Port Huron site, but for example, the Lansing casino, the proposed casino down there that's going through a battle now of its own. Can they just go ahead and do it?
Well,
wherever?
and that's my understanding is that there's a similar set of issues, and I'm not sure they're identical, but the Sioux tribe has proposed a theory under which they can open that casino, which, if they're correct, then they could open a casino anywhere they want in the U.S. Right. And I had a former member of the tribal council, Aaron Payment, say that to me on a show we did in an interview. He said, "Yeah, that's our view, is that we can open a casino wherever we want. Not that we're going to, but I don't. That is not in. There's no lawsuit yet. I think construction of that casino has to start. Although I would think Lansing's ready. I know the tribe voted in favor of going ahead with that. They had a referendum, and overwhelmingly, the members of that tribe are in favor. So that may be coming as well. But these things take a very long time to work out in the courts.
Yeah. Well, we're, believe it or not, halfway through already, so let's take a quick break here on the briefing room. We will be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm your host, Bill Froehlich from WTCM News. It's our weekly roundup of stories making headlines across northern Michigan, and this week we're joined by Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio, John Flesher from the Associated Press, and Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10 News. Sara, I wanted to talk to you about the story you did this week. I covered it as well, and people may have, if not seen it, heard it. They may have read it in the local paper as well. The Commission on Aging looking at some funding issues with how they're paying their housekeeping staff. Tell us what you found out.
Well, the Leelanau County administrator told us that the director that was in place for their Commission on Aging had been there for about 25 years, more than 25 years.
Right.
And all of their housekeepers, I believe he said there's 14 of them, they receive mileage reimbursement, which is protocol. They've done that for years. However, the director of the COA was approving significant amounts of additional mileage, adding up so much so to, just from January to May this year, $5,500, but they suspect it's been going on for at least 6 years. And they have to have a complete audit done to really determine what's missing, but it's adding up to thousands of dollars. They're worried about—
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, it is, and they're worried about now, you know, with the IRS and tax implications, because none of these housekeepers claimed it as taxable income. So they're really, you know, they're really concerned about that. So it's really just about getting an audit done. The director was put on leave, and she's now submitted her letter of retirement, and it's been accepted.
The thing that strikes me most about this story is that the director of the Commission on Aging is said to have received no benefit whatsoever.
That's what I was thinking as well. That came across my mind, thinking, well, you know, but do we know that yet? We may not know that yet. There may have also been some sort of, you know, on that end, but I guess, you know, it's investigation that will turn out.
How did it come up?
A discrepancy in timesheets. Someone brought, you know, one timesheet and said this timesheet is, you know, not matching up with what the pay stub says, and so forth. And then basically how the administrator explained it to us was, briefly, to put it in perspective, you know, a housekeeper leaves their house in the morning and drives, say, 10 miles to a senior's home that they're cleaning. From there, they're supposed to go to the next senior citizen's home. They were adding up the mileage like they were going to their home each time and back.
Starting from the
and then
beginning.
Doubling the longest distance. So
Starting from point A.
Starting from point A and going back and forth. And so that's what he said is really
The other thing
concerning.
that stood out to me in that too is that the director of the Commission on Aging had said this was started openly 5-6 years ago because we had a problem and concern from our staff, rising gas prices. What can we do to combat this? And she claimed that the previous county administrator had said, well, let's just give them extra money for mileage, make it happen. And
Usually the way you do that, though, is you raise the amount per mile. you
Yeah.
don't just add extra miles.
Right.
So, you know, she's saying this was approved 5 years ago. This has never been a secret. This is how we've always done this. And I'm just kind of the scapegoat for now the new county administrator has discovered this, and this is what it comes down to.
I guess that you know, he had said something about the daily logs stay with the COA, and they only get the bi-weekly log. Or there's some way that it, you know, slipped through the cracks.
That was the other thing too. She said, and I saw this quote in the paper, that it's not like we haven't made these available. You know, anytime the county would have done an audit in the past 5 or 6 years, they could have seen these. Nothing's hidden. It's all written down. So that's just what sticks out to me, is that it just seems interesting that she's alleged or not alleged to have gotten any benefit from this whatsoever, and she says it's been an open practice. And,
Right.
Yet now she's kind of taken the hit in terms of being forced out, in her words.
So what happens next?
Well, the county's, I think, trying to figure out how much investigation they're doing versus what they need to turn over to the police and let the police investigate. The other thing the county administrator said too was, we don't know that there's anything, you know, we don't, obviously they're not the police, but we don't know what charges could be filed against the housekeepers.
Because they were
told to
directed by
do
a
it.
superior.
Yeah, they were told to do this, this, and this.
So
It's an ongoing,
something to keep an eye on.
yeah, an interesting saga, to say the least. Another saga, the Asian Carp story continues as well. John, you've kind of paid attention to some of the latest details, which, a lot of times I think we're really interested in what happens in Lake Michigan, but this obviously affects all the Great Lakes, and Lake Erie is the most recent newsmaker.
Yes, the latest discovery of DNA from Asian carp took place in Lake Erie. And it's an interesting story. I've been following the Asian carp threat for a number of years now. And most of the focus has been on the Chicago area, where there's a series of waterways that leads into Lake Michigan. And the great fear is that the Asian carp would come up through the Mississippi and then through the Illinois River and make their way on into Lake Michigan. And that could lead to sort of a critical mass that could infest the entire Great Lakes eventually. In fact, there was a scientific study that came out this summer which said that, in fact, it's believed that there is sufficient habitat and conditions in all of the Great Lakes to be able to have Asian carp. There was some question about that, about whether they could survive in the cold waters and whether there were enough spawning areas for them. But this report, which was U.S. and Canadian, suggested that yes, they probably could, even in Lake Superior. And so that just emphasized the need to try to keep them out of the Great Lakes to protect the native fishery. Now, one of the tools that they've been using to try to figure out just how far the Asian carp have advanced is DNA. The same type of DNA that you can use in human criminal investigations, you can also use to track Asian carp. And it was discovered recently that some Asian carp DNA had been found in Lake Erie in Sandusky Bay and Maumee Bay, and in the two rivers that flow into Lake Erie over on the western side. And what happened was some scientists with some universities, and the Nature Conservancy as well, had been doing water sampling in that area, but it had taken a good while to process the samples. So the samples were taken just about a year ago, and it was just last month in July when they discovered that about half a dozen of these samples had silver and bighead carp DNA. And so the states of Michigan and Ohio, along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, just recently went out and did some extensive sampling in those areas. They also did some electrofishing, which is to send electric currents into the water. It temporarily stuns the fish so that they could be more easily caught. And they did some netting and did not find any Asian carp. They also took about 500 more samples that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to process, and so they'll see if there's any more. And the thing about the DNA is that the scientists I've spoken with over the years think it is a good indicator that at some point there were live fish in that area. That doesn't answer questions like, well, how many were there and where did they come from? And
Are they still there?
Yeah, are they still there? Is this an established breeding population, or did just some anomaly that they got there one way or another? Could the DNA have gotten there through some other means? There are a lot of questions about it still, but the prevailing theory seems to be that yes, it does indicate some live Asian carp, but there's still a lot of questions to be answered about that.
Why is the turnaround time so slow on the DNA testing?
Well, they took a lot of samples. In this case, this was part of an ongoing process where they're doing water sampling all over the Great Lakes region, and it wasn't just to look for carp, it was just part of a broader scientific study. And it just so happened that they turned up the carp samples at that particular time. But they take thousands of samples when they do this, and it's just a rather slow process to get through them, and it is sort of coincidental that they happen to come across this.
You've covered a lot of the carp issues as well, Peter.
Not like John.
What stands out for you? Does anything still bug you about this issue?
Does it still bug me? I don't.
Lingering questions.
Well, I don't know. The most recent reporting I did on it has been a few months, but I was interested in the apprehension of trucks coming across the border.
Oh.
I had gone to Toronto because I had learned that there were a couple of these busts where their live carp were found coming up from the southern United States bound for Toronto. Toronto has the largest Asian population in the Western or North America, I think. And in particular, Chinese people like their fish live. They like to go into a market, buy a live fish out of a tank, and have it butchered, right? Have it cleaned up and filleted right there, and take it home. And so there was some speculation that there was a black market in Toronto. People still wanted, even though the Canadians have banned the sale of live Asian carp. I think the three, the silver, the big head. What's the third?
Well, they're grass carp and black carp, but they're not seen as big a
Right.
threat.
I thought there was a third one that was a big threat. Anyway, you can't sell those live. They sell those fish at these markets. But so just recently, there was the most recent thing that happened was a court in Ontario fined one of the companies $50,000, which I think is quite a lot if you're running a business shipping carp up from Arkansas into Toronto. So they're taking it very seriously. But the thing that surprised me, I had the impression, I thought these were live tanks, and this was, they were trying to get these across the border, but which I couldn't figure out how that would ever happen. But apparently what goes on is they're on ice, but the carp can survive, I don't know how long, but apparently quite a long time on ice. And so they'll throw the thing in the tank and it'll revive. And so, but I would think if the court is fining this company $50,000, they believe that they were knowingly doing this and intending to sell these fish in some kind of black market setting to people that want to buy live Asian carp. So that's a story that that I've paid some attention to. That's happening.
Yeah.
And they actually in Ontario did because their fear is that if you're a truck driver and there's some kind of stop or they're checking, you're going to ditch these things, dump them into a ditch or, try and pitch them somewhere so you don't get caught with them and then you have them out in the Maumee. But Ontario, they actually, the wildlife agency there, they did they run these test sort of emergency drills about how to deal with that very scenario, because they're very concerned about it.
Well, that's another story that we'll continue to follow, and we'll keep watching John's reporting on that as well. We are out of time on the briefing room. I want to thank Sara Simnitch, John Flesher, and Peter Payette for coming in and joining us on the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich, your host today, and if you're joining us late, catch the rebroadcast on TV or join us online as well. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.